All right, so the Chiefs revealed their initial 53-man roster, and there were quite a few surprises on there, to say the least. From players released, placed on IR, extra players added to a certain position group. There's a lot to get into, so let's break it all down and more. But first, how about those? All right, the first is not surprising at all. Two quarterbacks, Mahomes and Minshew, so Oladokin and Zappi are moving on. Maybe Chris O will make it to the practice squad. That's where I personally would like to see him. Next up is running back. There's really no surprises to my 53-man roster projection yesterday, and that is 4, with those being Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, Brashard Smith, and Elijah Mitchell, which does mean fullback Carson Steele was waived earlier today, and I would like him to end up on the practice squad if at all possible. Now, I will say I'm not sure if all of these running backs are going to stay on there, specifically Elijah Mitchell. When I look at it, the Chiefs can claim some guys off of waivers tomorrow. I still think we're going to see some mix-ups, and then we'll see what happens with the practice squad as well. Now, if we get to the next position group, it's going to be wide receiver, and this is by far the most surprising one to me. Since 2019, they have only taken 7 wide receivers at the most. Well, for this one, they went with 8. Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown, Jalen Royals, Juju Smith-Schuster, Tyquan Thornton, Nico Remigio, and Jason Brownlee. There is no more debate on which depth piece wide receiver is going to make it, because they all did. And basically, here's what's going on with that, in my opinion. Rashee Rice's suspension is incoming at some point. Sure, maybe they get to the hearing on September 30th, but they can still settle anytime between now and then. And if they settle, the suspension will basically be announced right after that, and Rice could be suspended before the start of the season still, week 2, week 3, week 4. So combine that with Hollywood Brown still dealing with the foot and ankle injury. I think he should be ready to go for week 1, but then also you had Jalen Royals. He did not practice today, with Andy Reid saying he is the one of the 3 mentioned, with the other 2 being Omar Norman-Lott with the ankle and linebacker Jack Cochran with the knee, to returning. I want to make sure I said that right. There were 3 players that didn't practice today. It was Omar Norman-Lott, it was Jalen Royals, and it was Jack Cochran. But Jalen Royals is going to be the last of those 3 to return. So combine the Rice suspension that's incoming with a couple of banged up wide receivers, and you had to go with 8. Nico Remigio had to make it as the team's returner. Nobody else stood out. There was no way you could lose him. And Jason Brownlee, they just must not wanted to risk losing him to waivers either. He is a red zone guy, 50-50 ball guy. He has shown to be reliable. So there you go with the wide receiver room at 8. All right, for tight ends, they did end up going with 3. That was what I said in my initial projection. With Robert Tonyan, the veteran, being waived, remember, the difference between being a veteran, so you have 4 years of NFL experience or more, or less than that, the difference is if you have more than 4, you're a vested vet and you don't have to clear waivers. So some of these guys that I talk about when I talk about the difference between waived and released, Robert Tonyan is a guy that does not have to clear waivers, and there are plans to bring him back to the roster. I think, this is what I think, if Rice gets suspended, once that happens, you have a freed up spot on the roster, and Robert Tonyan ends up coming in, and you have another tight end. But I also want to point this out as well. Jake Brenningstool was placed on IR with a designation to return. You can only have 2 players placed on IR with a designation to return after week 4, and they used one of those 2 on Jake Brenningstool, which means we actually could see the undrafted free agent out of Clemson that played 60% out of the slot in college get some snaps in the Chiefs offense this season. It's too early to tell, but the fact that they designated him to return means it could happen. All right, for the O-line, it was as I projected, the 9 exact players being the starters. This isn't a huge surprise here, so I'm not flexing, but Josh Simmons, Kingsley Suamataia, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, and Jawan Taylor, with the 4 after that being the next man up, swing tackle, Jalen Moore, then Wanye Morris. Then your 2 interior guys, Mike Caliendo, who will be next to either guard spot. Hunter Norzet is your backup center, but he also has guard flex and also played some right tackle in college as well. Well, that means you did release a couple of guys, or waive rather, a couple of guys that were surprising to some Chiefs fans, with those being CJ Hansen and Esa Pole. Chu Godric, he's probably going to end up back on the practice squad as their international pathway player. And then Driscoll. Ethan Driscoll, he was placed on the reserve NFI because he had his appendix removed, so he himself could also find himself back on the 53-man roster after week 4. But yes, a lot of Chiefs fans, they wanted Esa Pole. The undrafted guy hasn't been playing in the NFL very long, but he had a great preseason. They wanted him to make the roster over somebody like Wanye Morris. Well, I think the coaching staff is hoping, praying, whatever they're doing. It's been a long day, okay? I'm just saying all kinds of stuff here, that Esa Pole can clear waivers and end up on the practice squad. I think Jalen Moore is going to be right or left tackle if injuries hit the room, but then Wanye Morris would be the next man up right after that. So hopefully Esa Pole can end up on the practice squad. We'll see what they do with Ethan Driscoll when he's able to return from the NFI, and maybe CJ Hansen as well, and Jason Chu-Godric also end up on the practice squad. All right, so here's the entire offense, if you want to see it all on screen, all together, and now we're going to get straight into the defense, starting with defensive tackles. And look, I've been saying it, but every video almost, Made Mob merch, mademob.com/HBTChiefs, and use code HBTChiefs will get you 20% off and a little kickback for me, but dude, I love Made Mob stuff. This is a partnership with Kelsey and the Ignition Lab. A lot of good stuff out there, so get you some while you can. All right, from here, let's get to the defense, starting with defensive tackles. There's a key guy missing that I had on my projection yesterday, but we'll get to that in a second. The 4 that did make it are Chris Jones, Jerry Tillery, Omar Norman-Lott, and Derek Nottie that they just traded for from the Jets over the weekend. But that does mean that Mike Pennell, the vested veteran, is released. He could be on the practice squad, could find him back later. We will see. The only veteran that I saw that was released that the team said, hey, we do plan on having him back so far is Robert Tonyan. That's all I know right now, but I think a lot of these veterans are going to end up on the practice squad. Well, for what it's worth, right before exporting this video, Mike Pennell did post to an Instagram story saying life is comedy, so he doesn't seem very happy right now about being released. So we'll see if he actually does end up returning or signing with the practice squad or not. But right now, I'm not that confident about it, at least at this point in time. And then for defensive ends, you do have 5. I did say I'm not sure the 5th one is going to be on the roster. It might be somebody they claim off of waivers. It could still happen because I think Malik Herring can make it to the practice squad. But the 5 defensive ends are George Karlaftis, Mike Dana, Charles Omenihu, Ashton Gelati, and Malik Herring. And so they released Nate Matlack and Owen Carney. No real surprises there because you had FAU and Janarius Robinson both placed on IR. We'll see what they do. If Malik Herring stays on the roster as defensive end 5 or they end up rolling with somebody else here sooner rather than later. Next, linebacker, locked in at 6. I had Cam Jones making it as number 6, but the only UDFA to make the roster usurped him, was able to surpass him because of his special teams play and some of his standouts during the preseason, with that being Cooper McDonald. Outside of that, no real surprises. Nick Bolton, Drew Tranquil, Leo Chanel, Jeffrey Bossa, the 5th round draft pick, and then Jack Cochran is your core special teamer and can be your Mike linebacker, wear the green dot in case of injuries. He's done it when Nick Bolton and Drew Tranquil have both been out before. Now, that being said, Brandon George did get placed on IR, and he was only one of 3 players that did not get the designation to return. They designated another guy that we'll talk about next to return, as well as the aforementioned tight end Jake Brenningstool. But Brandon George was placed on IR, so his season could be over, but it's a cheaper contract, which means they most likely reach an injury settlement with him, and he becomes a free agent. But I do wish the best for Brandon George. Would love him on the practice squad. He's the guy with the 9.98 relative athletic score. But then also Cam Jones, Cole Christensen. They didn't make the roster either, so those are a couple of other practice squad candidates as well. All right, cornerbacks. They're going to go with 6 on the initial 53. Trent McDuffie, Jalen Watson, Christian Fulton, Noel Williams, Chris Roland Wallace, and Joshua Williams. I didn't know that Joshua Williams was going to make the roster, didn't have him making it on really any of my projections, but a reason why that happened is because Nazeeh Johnson was placed on IR with the shoulder injury with a designation to return. So both Jake Brenningstool and Nazeeh Johnson can potentially return after week 4, and we'll see what happens with Joshua Williams after that. Chris Roland Wallace also, just for the record, has been working in primarily as a safety and then your backup slot guy. So he is technically a safety, even though he is listed as a corner on the Chiefs roster. But yeah, Nazeeh Johnson should be back sooner rather than later, but he did, surprisingly to me, get placed on IR. All right, for the safety room, we found out first thing this morning that veteran Mike Edwards got released. Not sure if he'll be back at all, but he had some up and downs during preseason. Didn't have the same burst that he had when he was here a couple years ago. So the Chiefs ended up releasing him very early on this morning. So that means the 3 rostered are Jaden Hicks, Brian Cook, and Shamari Connor. But again, Chris Roland Wallace has been working in at safety as well. So it's really kind of like 5 corners and 4 safeties at this point in time. So there you go. On defense, then we'll get to special teams and offense. You've got 4 defensive tackles, 5 defensive ends, 6 linebackers, 6 corners, 3 safeties, and then your specialists, no surprise, Harrison Butker, Matt Ariza, and James Winchester. And then for offense, 2 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 8 receivers, 3 tight ends, 9 offensive linemen. Again, it's just an initial 53-man roster. Things can change. It's going to be fluid. We'll see some guys added to the practice squad. The Chiefs might claim a couple of guys off of waivers, but this is how it initially has panned out. And I'm just glad that we're here because football's right around the corner. We've been doing 53-man roster projections since the draft got over. So a couple of the biggest surprises were just players that got placed on IR. That was really impossible to know. And then the extra receiver. So again, you've got Nazi, Jake Brenningstool, and Brandon George on IR, but both Nazi and Brenningstool can return after week 4. Ethan Driscoll on the NFI. Then they released several veterans that I thought could potentially stick around. Cole Christensen was another one. But again, Mike Pennell, we'll see if he ends up on the practice squad. Where I want to see the Chiefs look to add some depth now, safety room, potentially defensive end 5, running back. Still can't rule out them trying to add somebody else in there. Maybe they're high enough on Elijah Mitchell and we just don't really know, but those are a couple of position groups as well. And then I do think Robert Tonyan finds his way back, especially once Rice is suspended or they find some other way to get him on the roster. But yeah, you guys got to let me know what surprised you the most. Where were you like, whoa, he didn't make it, or he made it over this guy? Argue in the comments down below. I'm actually permitting you to do that in this initial 53-man roster projection. And until next time, let's go. Let's freaking go. How about those?